Okay, welcome back. I'm going to finish talking about PBIS, and I'm going to start talking about the basics of simplified functional behavior assessment. And we're going to get through all of that today, and then we'll see how far we get on the next piece. And tomorrow, the focus will move more toward individual kids' instruction, management, and those kinds of things. Continuing on, and these weird little things that I show you in between times are part of a whole planning sheet of what would a school do next to get this going. And so the next part is you got to start thinking about how you're going to collect data. And again, I want you to think of data as thermometer on the forehead. What are you going to use to be able to walk around your school and know who is and is not responding to your good stuff? So you've got all this high probability stuff in place. Who's it working for? Now, if I ask you right now, who in your school is it not working for? If this is all one school, you're all naming the same 2 kids. We don't need thermometers on the forehead to find the kids that do something wrong every day, 3 times a day. That's not what PBIS is about. It's about finding the kids that are gonna be those kids later if we don't get something going. So there are 3 things that we have to have in place to make that work. Number 1, the system that you use has to be something that we all agree on. What does it mean if we say there was a fight? If you think that anytime 2 kids disagree is a fight and you think there needs to be blood, if you say there's 50 fights, I don't really know what you're talking about, and neither do you. What are your definitions? I've seen this in schools. I literally had a school that had these 4 categories: insubordination, not following directions, defiance, and non-compliance. Those are all the same thing. And when I would ask, what's the difference? Everybody had an answer, but everybody's answer was different. And all you're doing is taking something that's this big and chopping it up into pieces that nobody knows are there. So we've got to just sit down as a school and come up with, what are the behaviors that we're interested in following? How will we know when that has happened? And what's your threshold? Do you really want to collect data on every misbehavior? Here's a kid that is walking down the hall and belches. Do we need to document that? See, I'm thinking no, but that's up to your school. But if you don't, as a school, say, here's the threshold at which we want to document something, people are documenting all kinds of weird stuff, and again, it's hard for us to know what's going on. Second, simplicity. Everything we do related to gathering data on behavior and using it should take all the people in our school less than 1% of their time, or it's not realistic. We have too many other things to do to add an onerous data collection. So we got to think, how do we fit this into what we already do? It's got to be something simple. It can't be added on. And finally, if you're going to collect data, you have to use it. If you collect data and never use it, it's worthless. And people will stop collecting it. And they should. I was collecting this data, but they don't even look at it, so why would I bother? And they'll stop doing it. So you need to use it monthly. And whatever you use it for needs to be reported back to the whole school. Here's what we know about our school because of the data you collected. That's what makes people keep collecting it, is that they realize it's useful. So when we think about office discipline referrals that go to the office for kids having problems, we generally want to know how often, where, when, what, and who. And there are some simple ways we can get that information, that big 5. This is my favorite data collection form of all time. This is from an elementary school in Fairfax, Virginia. Notice that this is a report and a referral. You can use it for either one. I'll describe that in a second. This data collection form is the size of the palm of my hand, front and back, and it's on a little tablet. So there's that red gluey stuff at the top, and you can peel these off one at a time. Every teacher, every adult in the school carries this in their pocket. This is not a punishment, it's data. Nobody would ever say, you just earned a yellow slip, because there's no such thing. You would deal with the kid, and then you would report it. So what's the difference between a report and a referral? A report is, it happened, it's above the threshold that we all talked about, but it's below the threshold of going to the office. So I dealt with it myself. Here's what somebody might ask. Why would I bother reporting something if it wasn't really an office referral? Here's why. Because if I'm a kid and I had a problem with you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you, everybody in here thinks of me as a kid with 0 or 1 problem. In reality, I'm a kid with 10 problems, but nobody knows. I actually have a snowball that's rolling in that direction, but nobody knows. If you would have said, when I had that problem, come here, let's talk about this. What would be a better way to handle it? Here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to go to sit over there for 5 minutes and think about that. I'll come back over and get your ideas. That was my consequence. I corrected. The consequence was you sit out for 5 minutes of the activity, whatever. We come back, you get back in the activity, everything worked fine. Sometime later that day when I have an opportunity, I'm going to say, it was this time of day that it happened on this date, this kid's in this grade, here's the kid, and here's what I saw, here's where it happened, here's what I did. Check marks. You can finish one of those things in 10 seconds. Now, all of those that I happen to have banging around in my pocket or on my desk, on Friday I gather them all up and I go down to the office and I throw them in a box. Those are where the reports go. However, let's say that what I was doing as a kid was above the threshold for the office. I just fill out this part, I take that kid and the slip to the office and I say, here he or she is, here's the slip, principal needs to see him. Because they went above that threshold for office. In the office, they'll fill out the back part and they'll put this in that box. Anything that was a referral would go into the student's file. It was a referral above a line where we need to note this legally. The other ones don't go in their file. They just go into our data set. This is what we can do now. If you've taken all of these cards and entered them into a system, and there's a million systems to do this with, you can just make an Excel worksheet, which is what I've got on here as an example. In the early days, we did everything just by creating an Excel worksheet. You can put them in Infinite Campus, you can put them in the Swiss system, you can put them in, you name a system out there and you can do this the same way. In the Swiss system, they refer to this as minors and majors. In Infinite Campus, we've referred to them as reports versus referrals. But you could look at, what are just my reports? What are just my referrals? What are just the big versus the little, etc.? So now what I can do is I can very quickly go to my data and answer any question you'd want to know, because I've put on here who, what, when, and where. Show me that data and I could answer a question like this. What time of day would an 8th grade boy be most likely to have a fight on a Thursday? And where? Because we've got all the data, and as long as you've got that data, you can really pinpoint it. So if you as a school say, we believe when we did our mapping activity that all of our problems happened in the cafeteria at noon with this problem. I can go to my data and very quickly say, did this problem at noon in the cafeteria go up or down since we instituted that thing? My data will answer that question for me right away. So very quickly I get a whole bunch of data out of something simple. Here's the one more thing I think is important about the report. We're going to make changes in our school policies for PBIS dependent upon data. So let's say that every day, right after lunch, I deal with these kids that are outside my door banging on things and making noises, and every day I go out and I yell at them and deal with them, and it happens again every day. So the next time we have a faculty meeting, I stand up and say, we need to completely do our hallway routines over at 1 o'clock. It's not working at all. There's a whole bunch of messes outside my room, people yelling, I want to change the whole thing. Here's what we would do. We would go to the data and we'd say 1 o'clock in the hallway. We've never had any problems at 1 o'clock in the hallway. And that teacher might say, well, I just didn't write it down. Well, you should have, because we make changes based upon data, not who yells the most. We're going to say that if you want us to know there is a problem, you've got to document it. We will only make changes when the data say that's the smart thing to do for where we are. So I mocked up data in an Excel sheet, and again, this is really old because this is all we used to do. What if these were all the people who had problem behaviors last week? Going down the line here, if you looked at this Excel spreadsheet, you've got kid who saw it, what it was, we've got where it was, we've got time of day, whatever else you'd want to know. And all I do is look at this and I could sort it. First, I'm going to sort it by column B here by alphabet, and you'll see repeat offenders. Tanya now shows up as a repeat offender. Now what we want to ask is, how many times should a kid's name appear on our list before we decide that we've scratched off green paint and they're starting to rust? Is 1 enough? 2? 3? 4? It depends on your school. I've worked in schools where if you had 3, you had the fewest in the school. And I've worked in schools where if you had 3, it was what a lot of kids would get in a whole year. So here's a rule of thumb. Make your criteria for identifying kids a number that would generally identify 15 to 20% of your kids. So in some schools, that magic number might be 6 or 7 or 8, and in others it might be 1 or 2. But make it so that you're identifying that 15 to 20% who might need something else. Having identified them on here doesn't mean you're going to do something other than look. So I can pull an individual kid out. I'm going to pull Tanya out of there and look at her whole record. So I can see when Tanya had problems, where she had problems, what her problems were, and any kind of comments that were written in her data set. I can now bring mom in and have a very detailed conversation. Or I could say, you know what? I don't really think we need to do something individualized with Tanya. I think we just need to talk with the bus driver next, because it looks like that's the problem area. She's not having problems everywhere else, so we don't need this big plan. We need a bus plan. Let's just talk to the bus driver and see if we can put something in place. Again, what's the simplest thing we could do to conceivably make a positive difference? So here's what you need to do. You need to have a PBIS team in your school. Your PBIS team is very simple, and it has some very simple tasks. Although, like I said earlier, what I've been finding is PBIS teams are doing a million things. It's really, really simple. Your PBIS team gets together and they look at the data and say, is it working or not? And they report back to the school. So here's what a PBIS team needs to have. Representation from every faction in your school. If you're an elementary school, that's probably a representative from each of the grade levels. Or if you're a smaller school, it might be representation of primary and intermediate. You need to have a representation there from instructional assistants. There's a whole bunch of them in the school. They have a whole bunch of time they spend working with kids. It doesn't make sense for us to set this up and not include them. Here's another one. What if a kid's walking down the hall and doing either the right or the wrong thing, and the only person there is a custodian? Would you want that custodian to say thank you or, hey, that's not the right way? Or would you want them just to ignore it because it's not their business? I think we want all the adults in our school to be teaching the same things to our kids. So I think you need to have on your PBIS committee somebody who represents staff. I've worked on PBIS teams that have had bus drivers, cafeteria workers, secretaries. Now, I don't think you need a secretary but I think those staff people need to be represented. So that when I come and sit in this meeting and the committee reports back, I know that they've considered things that I want considered because I'm represented. So if I say, here's what I think is the problem, and you represent me, I just come to you and say, when you're in that meeting, could you mention that this would make it a lot better if we did this and this? You're my mouthpiece for that. I go to my representative. Okay, so now this whole team comes in, we sit down. Our first task is to say, what was our goal? And we all look at each other and we say, well, we've got two goals. One was to have problems in the cafeteria, especially with noise and something go down. Or we say, our first goal was to have problems in the hallway cut in half by the first 2 months of school. Now we say, okay, let's look at the data. Here's data. This is real data from the Swiss system is a school-wide information system, which is a nonprofit system that runs out of the University of Oregon. It is, does everything you want it to, and it's cheap. However, things you already have will probably do the same thing for free. So that doesn't mean you need the Swiss. This is real data. I've chosen this one for a couple of reasons. One, if you were looking at this data and saying, did problems get better? Well, this doesn't give you enough information. If you were that elementary school, did problems with loudness get better in the cafeteria? I don't know. What were we calling loudness? Were we calling that defiance or disruption? Because we don't have one here that says loudness. That's one thing we would have had to have agreed upon way up front. When you say kids are being loud, what are you calling that? So if I see 1,000 referrals in there for kids being loud, what would it be called? If everybody in here calls it something different, then we don't know how many there were. Second question I want to ask is there something obvious in here we should be attending to? Yes, you should be attending to tardies. Why? Because attending to tardies would give you a bigger bang for your buck than anything else you go after. If you cut tardies in half, you'd get a bigger impact on your school than you would by getting rid of any of these other things. The other thing that I think is weird about this one, and I use it as a non-example, don't put categories on there that you're not going to use very often. This particular school has weapons, bombs, arson, alcohol. If you need to keep data on the number of bombs in your school, you've got way bigger problems than PBIS is going to be able to solve. I would put other. Make your form smaller. Because if it's going to be bombs, I'm hoping we get a note about it anyway. I'm not just going to go, 2 bombs this month. I'm going to go who, what, when, where. So as long as we're going to need a bigger story anyway, other. I would like this to be a very small number of bars that represent all the behaviors that we consider to be our problems. So keep it simple. What I'd rather do is say our goal was cafeteria. When? At lunch. Okay, let's go to our time. We go to our time. Yep, 12:30. I can pull out just that bar in my form and say, tell me who, what, where at 12:30. And we probably are going to say, cafeteria, everybody, loud and messy. Okay, compare what we're seeing, everybody loud, messy this month to where we were last month. Are we getting better? If we say, no, it's not getting better, or no, it's getting worse, then here's what we know. The strategies we said we were going to use for that, one of two things is true. One, we never did those things. Or two, those things don't work. So the first question you always ask is, when you see something didn't work, each of you represent a faction of the school. Do you guys think people really did that? Everybody's going to stand in their doorway during passing time and say these 3 things to kids. Hey, that didn't work at all. My first question is, did we really stand in our doorways and say those 3 things? Well, we did for like a day or 2 and then it stopped. Then we don't really know if that was the problem or if it's just a fidelity issue. Those are discussions we have among that team. You could pull it out this way too. The reason I show you this graph is because it is a very typical graph of a school that's doing well with PBIS. PBIS schools don't have 0 problems. 1, kids spend the vast majority of their time in a classroom. Your classroom will have more problems, and that's normal. People look at this a lot of times and say, oh no, classroom management's bad in our school. That doesn't say that necessarily. It says kids are in the classroom more, so more problems happen there. But kids are only in the hallway a very small amount of time, and that one's up, so this is definitely something I'd want to be focused on. But again, I can go back to my cafeteria, which is this one, and say this is what we all said we wanted to go after. 1, we've had very few problems in there. 2, we could break this apart and say who, what, when in the cafeteria. So we can break this apart to answer any question you want. And the big idea is just that we build our what are we going to do next month based upon what we saw happen last month. And you can build these things to find people, but notice kid number 11 here. Again, you don't need PBIS to know about kid number 11. Kid number 11 is going to come find you whether you have PBIS or not. I'm concerned about these kids who are going to become if we don't do something. Their snowball's rolling hard. The other thing I don't think people think about enough is, I don't know what this is going to change. This group. These are all kids with 1 referral. The reason this is so small in the green is because this doesn't show kids that got 0. So this is the tip of the iceberg here. There's a bunch of 0 problems here, but if you focused on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 kids who have all had 1 problem in the last month, you'd figure out where things are likely to go wrong randomly for average kids. And here's what you should think. If these 12 to 13 kids that really don't have problems very often are having problems in general in this area with these things, I will bet you that these kids are doing it 3 times as much for the same thing in the same place. So going after the small things here will have an impact on the kids with more problems, probably double the impact. So it's still good to look at what are the most common things even amongst our one-timers. So what we want to do then is be able to, over the years, compare how we're doing. So this is from a real high school. Last year to this year, last year to this year, last year to this year. So if that was total problems, that looks good. But it doesn't mean that our worst problems went down. So I'd like to see this same graph broken out by cafeteria last year, this year, or cafeteria at noon, or whatever it is you're tracking, we could look at in more detail. This is more of that same school, so they broke it out. Are the things that we said were our biggest concerns, are they getting better? They say, yes, they are. This is evidence for saying, let's keep doing what we're doing. It appears to be having the effect we want. And then make it public. Even after your team gets done with it, and again, I think your team can meet for 15, 20 minutes and do everything we just talked about. Then you take it back to the faculty meeting and you just say, we looked at the data, here's what it said. We all decided that that meant this, so we're going to keep going with what we're doing. And if you say, I disagree, I think we should stop, you're totally wrong. We say, well, we're going for 1 more month. Our goal is this. If we don't get that, we'll revisit it. But if we do, we're going to keep doing this because it's making our kids more successful. Let the data make that decision. So I'm going to switch a gear here out of PBIS, but I'm going to keep coming back to the idea. And what I want to do is apply that same concept of PBIS to classrooms and individual kids. So here's how we're going to do this. I've worked with the people that put this together because you all work in Indiana. They were able to get me access to your retirement account. So I have all of your retirement right now. They've given it all to me. If you check your balance right now, if you're online, it's zero because I have it all. And I've taken that billions of dollars and I'm going to bet it for you. I'm going to help you double your money. Here's how we're going to do that. Inside this doorway over here, waiting the whole time we've been here, inside this doorway is a classroom filled with random middle schoolers. You don't know them, but you know the random average middle schooler. Right here, I've got a teacher, brand new teacher, just came out of their program and have a diploma and a certificate. So we know they know everything. We're going to put them right here. When we say go, I'm going to open that door, throw them in there, and shut the door and lock it behind them. And they have to stay in there for a week. We're going to watch them on video cameras. And here's the bet. If the kids that we're watching in that room are engaged and on task 80% of the time, and nobody needs to be restrained or tossed out, you double your retirement savings in 1 week. This could be worth tens of dollars to many of you and thousands to others. However, if that doesn't happen, if any kid needs to be restrained or secluded, if at any time 80% of the kids aren't on task, you've lost it all. That's how important this is. That's how dire the circumstances are for you. Knowing that, I'm going to let you say one thing that's important to this teacher before we throw him or her in there. What's the one thing they need to know? Isn't there one if you know that, you can teach? No, there isn't. So all you can say is, please. But you could say, you got to be genuine, you got to love them. Yep. Will that be enough? You've got to really know good instruction. Yep. Will doing that without having any of the other liking kids things work? No. Okay, there's no one thing to say. It's a whole bunch of things. Teaching is a complicated art and science kind of mixed together. So for us, this is where we pretend like we're in Las Vegas for the rest of the afternoon. And we're going to be sitting in this sports book, but instead of football, we're going to be watching a classroom. And when this classroom's on task, you guys are going to be like ordering drinks and partying and having a great time because you're thinking about that double retirement. Of course, when those kids are starting to get off task or a kid's looking like he's really ornery, you guys are going to be really frightened. So, one more thing to think about. In order for you to win your bet, that teacher not only has to know how to manage a classroom and teach effectively in a classroom, this is the part that we don't talk to teachers about as much. You're going to have a kid in that classroom who's not in special ed, who's going to be a pain, and you're going to have to deal with that kid too. You were doing great on your bet until that kid showed up, and now you could possibly be starting your career over again because of this guy. Because that teacher, although he or she might know instruction and management, may not know how to deal with him. And that's the reality out there. All it takes is one kid to drive you nuts. So we have to be able to make sure we can deal with classrooms and kids if we're going to win that bet. So I'm going to start this whole thing with a concept. That concept is that of function of behavior. Here's a simple way to say function of behavior. Why did that kid do that? That's the question of function of behavior. How many of you in here have ever done a functional behavior assessment? Okay. How many of you have heard of a functional behavior assessment? Okay, so there's people in here who haven't even heard of it yet. which is fine. Because it's not something that we bring up often unless you're going to be a behavior specialist or a school psychologist. But it's a basic logic that I'd like to lead you through. Functional behavior assessment is figuring out why somebody's doing what they're doing. Is it possible we could never know? Yes, it is. Is there a way for us to figure it out? Functional behavior assessment started back in the 40s and 50s, and it was only used at that time with mainly adults with significant disabilities. And it was used to figure out why they did things like self-abusive behaviors, head pounding and scratching. And they found that what they called communicative functions, that when people did those kinds of things, there was usually something behind it. That they found if they gave them these things or gave them this attention or took these things, those things were less likely to happen. And they could train people once they figured out why it was happening. That logic was then applied to kids with what we would at that point would have called EMR, or kids with mild cognitive impairments, we call now, MMI now. And what they found was you could make really good headway with behavior with those kids in a classroom setting if you could understand function, but it took an army of people to come in to do the assessment to figure that out. In the early 80s, this began being applied in behavior disordered areas, but it was never applied formally as part of a school district. It was applied here and there mainly as research. But the research started saying functional assessment can be effective for figuring out what's going on with kids with problem behaviors in a typical behavior disordered area. In 1997, it became part of federal law. Under IDEA in 1997, they threw in this thing that said, and if a student does X, Y, Z, these certain things, you must do a functional behavior assessment. Those of us who were advocating for functional behavior assessment were excited at first, and then we realized all that says is you must do FBA. It doesn't say how you do that, who should do it, how long it should last, what you should do with it. And so people were just pulling out their crayons and writing on a napkin and calling it an FBA, and it actually, I think, in many ways made things worse. So what I want to do is go back to the start. What does the concept of function mean? So here's the way I want you to think about this. Let's say that you go down to lunch, and when you come back from lunch, you walk into your classroom, and here's Jimmy standing on your chair. Your desk chair. What do you say to Jimmy? Yes, all of us say, "Get off my chair." And then Jimmy does this. "Oh, yeah, sorry." And then we have to ask, "Why were you on my chair?" And you've all asked that of Jimmy, and what does Jimmy say?
I don't know.
I don't know. So stop right there. He was on my chair and he doesn't know why? This sounds like a mental health issue to me. Perhaps we should just call like the people with the white gloves to come and kind of gingerly get him out of here. One, is it possible that Jimmy did stand on the chair and legitimately doesn't really know why? It's possible. Do you ever do something really weird and then think, why did I do that? That's not unusual. If you're doing that same thing every day, that's weird. So if every day you do a weird thing and then go, I did that again, really you should seek professional help if that's happening. But if it happened once and it never happened again, who cares? I say to Jimmy, why are you on that chair? I don't know. Well, don't. It never happens again. Do we need to pursue this? Nobody cares. We're only concerned when it happens repetitively. And then I want to know what's going on. The other thing is, I think Jimmy does know, but it's easier to say I don't know than to come over and have a conversation with the teacher. Here are my options. Why? I don't know. Why? Well, here's what was going on. Let me tell you. And you're going to say, well, that was wrong. Well, I thought it was right. No. It's easier to say, I don't know, and walk away. So again, we don't know whether he knows or not. Doesn't matter right now. So if you were to ask people who don't know anything about function why Jimmy did that, these are the things they'll say, and I'm telling you up front, these are not functions. 1, it was modeling. He saw someone else do it. All of these are reasons why it happened. They're not functions. Reasons why it happened once, we may never know. Why does it keep happening is a function question. He saw somebody else jump up on the chair, so he thought he was supposed to. All right, I can see that happening once, and we told him don't. Not a problem, but if he keeps doing it, it's not modeling, it's something bigger. Modeling is how it got started. Number 2 is accident. I was just running through the room, and the next thing you know, I'm standing on this chair. Total accident. No idea how this happened. That's possible, but that's not a function. That's a how it might have happened, but it's not a he accidentally stands on my chair every day doesn't make sense. Why does it keep happening? Instinct. And I hear this one said like this. Oh, Jimmy, yeah, he comes from a long line of chair standers. His mom was in my class. She stood on a chair. That's just the way they are. That doesn't make sense. He may be, in some ways, predetermined to be more likely to stand on a chair because of his genetic makeup. I've never heard of any such thing, but let's just say that happens. The question again is it continuing to be a problem? If it is, we need to look at function. If it's not, whatever. Condition, if you haven't heard this one a million times, get ready for it because you're gonna. ADHD. How do you know he's got ADHD? Stood on a chair. And why did he stand on the chair? ADHD. It's this circular logic. Is it possible that this kid has ADHD? Of course, it's a real thing. Or, and you can just start naming off those DSM categories. Fetal alcohol syndrome, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar, all real things, but standing on a chair once is not evidence of those things. Here's the way I like to think of this. Go to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, and look up any of those things I just mentioned. They all have inclusion and exclusion criteria. Like ADHD must have age of onset before age 6, chronic and pervasive across settings, blah, 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 blah. They also all have exclusion criteria. And for every one of them, it's things like this. Can't be explained simply by an environmental factor. You know what an FBA is doing? It's trying to explain it by an environmental factor. So, in the reality, if you're thinking about this, FBA is the only way you should be able to determine if somebody has one of those conditions. If the FBA says it's not predictable in the environment at all, it happens, then the predictor's not in the environment, it's inside the kid. That's when we know we've got a mental health. So when people say to me during a FBA, I don't think we should do an FBA, this is just an ADHD kid. I say, you know how we can prove if it is or isn't an ADHD kid? See if there's a function related to this. If this is a totally unpredictable wild behavior that no one can figure out, then I think we need to call in a doctor to get the next part of this. But the first part is rule out simple environment. So modeling, accident, instinct, and conditions are why a behavior might have happened. Why do people keep doing it? 2 reasons. One is rare. 1, mental health disorder. Very rare, but they're real and they're out there. 2nd, and the one we're going to look at is because it works. How does it work? Well, when I do this, everybody laughs. I like laughter. When I do this, the teacher tells me to go to the office. I don't have to do reading. Those are functions. They serve a purpose for me. That's why I keep doing it. How did I learn to do it? Modeling, accident, instinct, condition. ADHD might make me more likely to jump on that chair in the first place. But it doesn't make me more likely to jump on it every day if it doesn't serve a function for me. So I still want to know, how did it work? This is one of my favorite cartoons that isn't really about function, but should be. The class was quietly doing its lesson when Russell, of course suffering from problems at home, prepared to employ an attention-getting device. Now, this teacher doesn't know anything about functional assessment, but what does she think the function of Russell's behavior is? What's in it for him? Attention. What if she would have said, Russell prepared to employ the go to the office device? That would have said to me, Russell's doing that to get out of here. So people do think functionally even though they don't talk functionally. You got to get them to answer those questions in the right way. That'll tell us. So how do you think Russell learned to use that machine? Could have been modeling. He saw somebody else do it and he thought, I'm going to give that a try. Could have been an accident. He walked by it one day and bumped into it and it did something really loud and everybody looked at him. And then he's got to decide, do I like people looking at me? If the answer is yes, I'm going to try that again. And now it was an accident that got it started, but it's the function of liking people giving me attention that makes me continue to do it. What if he hates people looking at him? Then we might be doing an FBA on a kid. You got this kid, Russell, refuses to go to the back corner of the room. He's very weird. And we might find out that's because when he goes back there, that thing goes off and everybody looks at him and he hates that, so he's avoiding it. We have to look at what's happening in the environment and how that predicts what the kids do with their behavior. So a long time ago, we tried to simplify an FBA. And I'll explain to you a little bit about complicated FBA, but I'm going to only talk about simple FBA today. When I was 1 year I spent as a behavior consultant, the year before I went into higher ed. My job was to go school to school and observe kids and write reports and do FBAs. And this is what it seemed like to me. I go to a school, I walk in, I go to the office and I say, I'm here to see this kid. And they go, yeah, third door on the left. I walk down there, I walk into a classroom and here's every kid staring at me. And the teacher says, don't pay any attention to him, which doesn't make anybody not pay attention to me. Somehow now that teacher's got to tell me who I'm looking at. So we've got to, hey, how you doing? Yeah, I'm just here to watch, I know. And then I'm supposed to sit down and look at that kid and not be obvious at all, you know? 9 times out of 10 that kid would go, you're looking at me, aren't you? No, why would I, who are you? No, why would I be looking at you? And what does the kid do on the day that I'm there observing?
Nothing.
He is the most perfect student ever in the history of school. May I help my peers with their homework, please? Holding doors and holding chairs. And then they say to me, after I've been there for hours, what'd you get on the FBA? And I said, I didn't see a single thing. What? You mean he didn't do this when they did this and he didn't do this and these guys? It's like, if you already know all the things he does and what happens before and after, why am I here? That's a dumb thing to try to do. Is if anybody thinks, oh, we've got this expert that can come in and watch for an hour and know more about the kid than we do from having been with them for years, that's ridiculous. And if somebody says they can do that, they're lying or they're wrong. So one of the things we said is we've got to get the people that see the kids every day to do this and just give us the information. So we developed this. It's called the erase system. This was a bookmark. So these were originally developed when I was at the University of Florida and we had a couple of elementary schools and every teacher in the school got a bookmark that looked like this. So we taught this to them. This year, instead of having a set behavior team that meets about kids with behaviors, we're going to build every behavior team based on the kid. So if the kid is in your room, you will be on that behavior team for that kid. And some people are going to say, wait, why would I be on a behavior team? I don't know anything about doing behavior stuff. And the answer is, it's not a behavior team, it's a kid team. And you know the kid. You've watched them, you know what's going on. That's why you need to be here giving us information. When you come to that meeting, you've got 5 questions that you should be ready to answer. Question 1 is, what have you seen that's a problem from that student? Here's what we learned by giving that to people. That was not enough. Because we did that, and then people would come in and we'd say, okay, what do you know about the kid? And the person would go, oh, him? He's a jerk. Okay, that's not a behavior. What else you got? He's a lazy jerk. Also not behaviors. He's a lazy jerk and he's obnoxious. Okay, none of those are behaviors. What does he do? So now here's the way we teach this. When you come to the meeting, I want you to have thought out in your head, what does that kid do and when do they do it and what does it look like? And I want you to give me a description of it that's so concise and clear that when you're done, I'll stand up and act it out and you will say, yes, that looks and sounds exactly like it. So obviously, obnoxious jerk, I don't really know what to do with that. He stands up and throws things across the room and curses. Those are things I can do. That's what we need. Write me a script in your head of what I should be doing to look and sound like the kid. That's step one. Step two, assume, and this is where you have to beat people over the head with this. Assume they're doing it for a reason. Well, they're not. Just assume that they are, and people will keep going back, and you just have to keep saying, if that was your only thing in the world that you had to think about was that there was some purpose for this, what could it possibly be for that kid? Make them give you something. Third, what do your really successful kids do under those same circumstances? Could we teach him or her to do that? Would that work for them? That's a replacement behavior. Fourth, I've been saying this all day on number 4, if I told you I'd give you $10,000 if that kid did this tomorrow instead of the wrong thing, what would you like to see the other adults in this school doing differently? What would we need to say? Where would we need to stand? How long should the period be? All of those pieces of things we'd have to talk about. And then finally, same question we ask with school-wide PBIS. Is it working? What's your thermometer on the forehead for this kid so that we'd know if this behavior plan is working? This behavior plan is just like what we were doing with PBIS. Predict, prevent, be consistent, collect data. That's all we're doing, those 4 things. But it's about one kid instead of a school. The other way to think about this, and when I do an FBA in a group with people, I draw one of these. You just draw these 5 boxes in line like that, and you say, here's what we're trying to figure out. Under some set of conditions, and we want this to be a smaller set, not a bigger. If you say the setting condition is when it's daylight, that's a big setting condition. If you can say setting condition is when it's independent work time, that will be much easier. But you have to say when, under what circumstances would this be most likely? Followed by what's the thing? So if we're in independent work time, he's not having that problem 100% of the time. But if this kid says that, or if the teacher gives this, or if, what's that one significant event that tends to trigger a problem behavior? What is the problem behavior? And what happens afterward to the environment? Does something go away? Does attention come? Does attention go? Do tangibles come? Do tangibles go? What changes? And if we can figure out what changes to this environment happen after that behavior, we can start to deduce, then we think he's doing it to get or to get away from, have a hypothesis. But don't think this is something that kids are thinking out. Like kids aren't going, independent work time. Looks like the teacher's asking me a question. What are my options? Answering? Not answering. They're not. This just happens. It's a habit. It's like when you got a new job at a new place, that first morning, you drive to work and you're thinking about every turn. Would it be faster to go this way or this way? And then once you get it down and you go every day, you can drive to work in the morning and when you get there, you don't even remember driving to work. It's a habit that's built by repetition. That's what's happening with kids. They get reinforced by the environment, by getting rid of something they don't like or getting something they do over and over and over to the point where they don't think about it anymore. It's automatic. In fact, we've got brain research that says when some kinds of behaviors result in reinforcement, so if it's getting something I want, positive reinforcement. If it's getting rid of something I don't like, it's negative reinforcement. Either one makes me want to do it more. The conditions that set that up are even more salient for us, which means this. As I get through this system over and over again, when I see that, my brain is even more likely to respond quickly. And I was talking to somebody from the University of Iowa's Brain Research Center at one point who said they've actually shown that there are pathways in the brain that are myelinated together because they're protected, because they need to be used so quickly to get to the reinforcers. So I think of this, as this has resulted in reinforcement over and over and over again, it's no longer a pathway, it's a freeway. I am a kid and I'm out here driving in my Ferrari on a 4-lane empty freeway with no speed limit. And I'm flying down the road and hey, independent work time, hey, teacher's asking me to do something. I don't stop and think, should I do it or not do it? I go immediately to 4-letter word. Why? Because it works every time. So I go up to 4-letter wordville, and that takes me right into go to the office and don't have to do this work. And it works every single time. So here's what we do. This is what we always do first. Hey, we're not going to let you go to the office for that anymore. From now on, you make those noises and call me 4-letter word, we're not going to let you go to the office. We have blown up the bridge between Noiseville and go to the officeville. Blown it up. Can't get there from here anymore. Kid goes, okay. So tomorrow, back in the Ferrari, back on the freeway. Remember how quickly this happens. Hey, independent work time. Hey, teacher's asking me to do that. They don't even stop to think. Bridge is out. They go straight to where they've always gone without even thinking. And when they get there, the teacher ignores it. What does the kid do now? Yeah. They don't go, bridge is out. They go, oh, but I could jump this if I went faster. Louder noises, longer noises, more obnoxious noises. Again, they can personalize those with 4-letter words for you and your family members, I found out. And at some point, you're going to have to respond, aren't you? I mean, this is called an extinction burst. And it will eventually go away, but I'll bet you can't handle how long it's going to take for it to go away. So eventually you're going to come running back over there and go, what? I told you just to... And that kid's going to go, oh, by the way, thanks for rebuilding the bridge. And what you've just done is you've taught that kid. In the future, if I say no, here's the consequences, just keep doing it, I'll give in. So we got to know before we ever get started, what kind of dynamite do we need here? Is ignoring a sufficient dynamite? If the kid's been doing this forever, I don't think ignoring is going to work very well. If the kid in any way is trying to escape, ignoring is a reinforcer. So I need to know in advance what's going on and how long it's been going on so I can figure out which dynamite is best. In some way, I've got to make that kid stop right here at the intersection so I can teach about going this way. Hey, I know what you want. You want a break from doing this work. Tell you what, if you follow this road down here and go through Handraysville, you can get the same thing. And he's going to go, could have gotten a lot faster by going the other way. Used to. But even if you eventually get it there, it's going to take longer and you're going to get less than if you go this way. But we've got to convince them to do it. Dig that hole in the floor, set the trap, make them do it right so that we can go, see, you got even more free time this way. You've got to make it work for them. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk through a couple of little cases. What I've got here are some videos. All of the FBA videos are made up. But I've got some videos here of the same kid 3 times in a row. This kid right here, his name is Eric. I'm going to show you Eric having a misbehavior, here's what I'd like you to do. As you watch this, I want you to think in terms of 3 terms. The environment. What's going on in the environment? Who's saying something? Who's not saying something? What's going on? Second term, I want you to think about what is the kid we're looking at doing? Describe their behavior. The third term I want you to think about is, after the kid behaves, what's different in the environment? Did something come extra? Did something go away? So what's going on? What'd the kid do? What changed? I'm going to show you 3 examples. Here's number 1.
You need to sit here quietly and do your work.
What time do I go to speech today?
Not until 2:30.
Okay, so we've got quiet work time, independent work. We've got kid humming loudly, and we've got what changed in the environment after humming. Teacher came over to him, talked to him. Okay, he got a question answered about when he went to speech. Let's do another one.
I don't get this one.
And here's number 3.
You need to sit there and be quiet and pay attention.
I really need to use the bathroom.
Get the hall pass and go.
What do we got going in here? How would you fill in this first box for Eric? What would you say about the environment going in? It's a classroom in all 3 settings. It looks like it's kind of independent work time or quiet work time or something like that. So we could say those kinds of things. What happened right before he had a problem behavior each time? Was there anything that you could say was consistent in that environment right before? Before he makes noises? Teacher's attention was elsewhere. So every time he looked up, looked for the teacher, she was somewhere else, that's when he started making a noise. So the behavior is noise making. What happens every time he makes a noise? What's he want? Teacher. Teacher comes over and answers questions and helps him with things and excuses him to use the restroom. And it's not that he loves having teacher attention, I don't think, as much as I want something and the teacher will get it for me. So when I look for her and she's not there, you know how to get her really fast? Make a noise. It's fast, it's simple, and it works every time. That's why I do that, because it's very effective for me. So we could have filled this in like this. Academic setting, again, I think you can make that even narrower. Independent work time. Here's the problem. Does he do this in other classes? Does he do this with other people? I don't know. So that's why that team needs to have other people. So someone else could say, doesn't do that in my room. What do you teach? I teach reading. He's doing that in math. Does he do that in science? We might be able to say, when in math class. Now we've taken that and made it a lot smaller. Our intervention will be a lot easier if it's math class instead of daylight. We want it to be as small as possible. No direct teacher attention gets the noises because it gets the teacher's attention. We can then fill that out on a little form and say, I'm going to create a function from it. What did we say the antecedent was? Independent work time, no direct teacher attention. What's the problem behavior? Disruptive noises. What's the consequence? Teacher attention. Here's a statement of function. During independent work times in the classroom and when the teacher is not attending directly to Eric, he engages in noise making to access the teacher's attention to meet his requests. That's a statement of a function of behavior, which is worth nothing unless you then use that to say, then how do we fix it? Okay, then what do we need to fix? We need to fix something during independent work times in the classroom. and the teacher's not attending directly to him, he wants attention, what kinds of other ways can we teach him to get attention? And how could we teach the teacher to move around the room where her eyes are up more so she could see him when he does the gesture, so she can say, I'll be there. And we're building a whole intervention around what we came up with as our definition of the function of the problem. Let's do another one. This girl, Sarah, standing up here, is in the 9th grade. Sarah has a history of some behavior problems, and it's not going well at all in this teacher's classroom. So I'll tell you a little more, but I'd like you to watch the clips. Here's what the teacher reports to us.
Sarah, would you please have a seat?
Not doing any of this crap today.
Then you won't get a grade for today. I want you to have a seat.
I heard what you said.
Students, open your books to page 257, please. Folks, I need you to turn in your homework. Sarah, did you do your homework?
No, did you?
If you didn't do it, then I'll need you to do it now.
I need you to get away from me.
Did you turn in your homework? And you got yours in? Good. Good job. Good. Sarah, you might want to check your answers.
I don't need your help. Go away.
Well, it looks like you might need to check those because 2 of them are not correct.
Well, it looks to me like blah, blah, blah.
Good.
Okay, so you just got to see 3 examples of Sarah's behavior. Here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to pretend like you're on that team. You're on the Sarah team that's talking about Sarah. Remember, this team is built based on people who know Sarah. So there's one person on this team who's kind of keeping records and who knows what an FBA is. The rest of the people on the committee don't know what FBA is. Here's what you know so far. One teacher has said, this happens in her academic classroom. So far, what it looks like is, anytime you ask her to do anything, she is, how do you want to describe her behavior? Sassy. Sassy. Okay. I know what that means. So defiant, sassy, rude, threats. Okay, we could put a lot of words in there that what she does. And then after she does that, what happens to this stuff? It kind of goes away, doesn't it? I always feel like it's kind of like this. Teacher says, I've got this big sack of heavy bricks I need someone to carry. Sarah, you carry them. And Sarah says, rude, rude, rude to you. Well, I'll have you carry them instead. Why wouldn't she do that every time? It works really well. I do not care to do work, so I will be sassy to you, and you'll stop asking me to do work. One of the things that you find, and I mentioned this in the very first slide this morning, is once a student has been identified as having behavior problems, the teachers don't want to go talk to them because they're not pleasant to talk to. As one of my colleagues referred to this as the unwritten social contract between teacher and problem student. I won't call on you, and in return, you won't be a jerk. We have this understanding. But what that means is no instruction. We're allowing them to stay out of it. So what we have to figure out is that accurate? We've got 4 other teachers we could talk to. So if you were on that team, I will be those teachers. What would you want to ask me if you wanted to narrow these boxes down? Let me give you a couple of things to think about. Any question you ask me that doesn't refer to one of those boxes isn't an FBA question. That doesn't make it a bad question. It's not an FBA question. An FBA question involves the immediate environment, the behavior, and the immediate environment. So what's going on at home? An interesting question, but it doesn't involve the immediate environment. If we can't figure this out from the immediate environment, a bigger FBA will be more like a wraparound where we bring in more people. Right now, our job is to say, could we change that instructional environment to change that behavior for the better? So, if there are a group of people sitting around the table here that are all teachers for Sarah, what questions would you have? How do we guide people to trying things? Because, and I don't mean to insult anybody here, but you've all seen this. You go to this meeting, and the bottom line is that teacher just wants the kid removed. And so they're not asking about what they can do, and they're not giving information that'll help, because that's not, you have to lead them to that. What would happen if this kind of a thing happened? Boy, that would be difficult, but maybe we could get someone in there to help you with it one day so we could try it. We've got to be on the kid's side in how we do this, and being against anybody that is obnoxious generally only makes it worse for the kid, is kind of the lesson I've learned from that. So, again, what we learned was it's not a male-female thing, it's not an AM-PM thing, it is academic setting, but only with an academic request. Not adult talking to her, not any request, academic request. But that's good because it makes our intervention smaller. How do we deal with not wanting to do academic requests, which is a lot easier intervention than not wanting anyone to talk to her or bigger? She's rude, she's defiant. That works for her to remove the request. What we have to figure out is, what are we going to want her to do instead? And she's the hard one. Eric, the first kid we did, he's an access to reinforcement kid. Why are you doing that? I want somebody to give me attention that I can use for something good. That kid's easy, relatively easy to control. Hey, how would you like double the attention? What you got to do is do this and not this. That works. But think about Sarah. What's Sarah want? To not have to do work. Is she successful at that right now? Then what would be the logic of saying to her, hey Sarah, if you'll do half the work, you can have half the time off? She's going to go, I already got a better deal. It's do none of the work, have all the time off. So what's in this for me to do any work when that's the function? She's a lot more challenging. And what it's going to mean for us is the intervention is going to have to be bigger than just a replacement behavior. It's going to have to include all of these pieces. One, a curriculum. What are you going to teach her to do? And you can't just say it. Eric, raise your hand. That's not instruction. Eric, let's say we were in a classroom and you really needed me. Why would you raise your hand? How would that work? How would you have to put your hand up? What if I wasn't looking? What if? Instruction. We have to have a curriculum that we teach explicitly. Second, you need to set aside time to have this. This can't be done while you're teaching. It might only take 5 minutes, but we need to make sure that we've created a time where we can deliver this instruction. Create an expectation or a goal to work toward. We said earlier this morning, when you say, you're here, we want you to be here, and you give feedback on the way, you get better outcomes. So let them know what the expectation is. Give them real examples. We will spend our morning tomorrow talking about effective instruction for behavior and how to choose examples. And I'm going to give you a couple of activities tomorrow where I make you the learner and set you up to fail so I can make fun of you before I show you the right way to do it. And a big part of it comes from, are these examples out of the book or are they from this kid's real world? They've got to be from that kid's real world. Routines and consistency. The more the kid can predict when this is going to happen, how it's going to happen, and it's consistent, the better our chances of having success. This can't be delivered as a sit and get. It needs to be a discussion. Let me show you, you tell me what you think about that. You try it, I'll tell you what I think. Let's go back and forth and practice. What would be another way to do that? Have you ever seen it? That back and forth is what we call engagement. Should we change the seat for this kid? What about for Sarah? Is this an arrangement issue? Should I be further away or closer to the student to make this work? I think with Eric, I want to be closer to. I think with Sarah, in the long run, I might want to be further from, because she seems to have more problems when I'm nearby. Prompts and reminders could occur anywhere along here, but your biggest probability for a reminder comes right at the intersection. No, here's the request. And right at that request is where you'd give your reminder. We've talked about this. You can give that reminder right when they walk in the door in the morning, and that's good and that's fine. But you're going to get your biggest probability out of that reminder when it happens closer to the time they need to make that decision. So right at the intersection is best. We know that they need to get the function. If Eric does it right, he must get some attention or it won't work. If Sarah does it right, she must get some sort of a release from something or it won't work. And this is where people put their foot down. Why would I give her something? Why would I give her a release just for doing some work? Because that's the function of her behavior. And she's doing it right now and making it work. So right now she's doing 0. If you could get her to do a little bit for something less than what she's getting, you're way ahead farther ahead than she is on this. You've got to be able to see that. The other functional consequence is you cannot let them get what they want by doing it the wrong way. So if Eric yells out and you run over there to have a conversation with him about why he yelled out, you just reinforced him. So we need to make sure that they can't get the function for doing it the wrong way, but they can for the right way. So I'd like to spend the rest of the day and most of tomorrow talking about this pathway and all those little signs and what those signs mean and how to make those work for our kids. So I'm going to start with the environment. I'm going to talk here for a couple of minutes and let's take a 5-minute break and you can grab a snack bar and a water or something. Let me get you started on this. The rest of our time together, pretty much, I'm going to be talking about teaching. We have data in 3 domains for being a teacher. The first one is instruction. We're going to talk a lot about that. All the different ways that can be put together to maximize probability. But the way a teacher teaches, giant effect sizes, lots of evidence. Second one is environment. We just did FBA, so think back on FBA how important environment is. Where I'm standing, when I go there, what the routine's like, what my seating arrangement is. All of those are things we control. Consistency is a big part of environment. The third area for which we have evidence is positive relationships between students and teachers. I will be honest, I don't know what to do with this one because in my years of training teachers, I've come to believe that if you don't like kids, I can't teach you to pretend like you do. I've tried. It doesn't work. And so, I've had these students, when I did student teachers years ago, I had a little checklist and I gave it to them and I said, when I come to observe you when you're student teaching, I want to see all these things. I want to see you greet the kids at the door. I wanted to give them an advanced organizer. I want you to be explicit. And I'd have people that could do every one of those things. And it was a horrible lesson because they were just nasty. And then I would say, I'm going to come back tomorrow. Could you try that again and smile? And I'd find out, no, they can't. And so while I know this one is important, the part that's hard for me is if a person doesn't have that, I don't know what to do with it. I know it when I see it. I think we all do. If you're a teacher, you can walk into a room and in 5 minutes you can go, that teacher's got that thing with kids, or they don't. But I can't measure it and I can't teach it. So here's the way I do think about it. This is just the best I've got. Maybe somebody's got something better. It would be best if you liked kids and they believed that you liked them and your instruction would work better. But logically, if you provide them with really, really good instruction, you are going to make them more successful. The more successful they are, the data says, when kids are doing well, they report liking their teacher more and that they believe their teacher likes them more. So maybe we'll fool kids into thinking because they're doing so well, you like people. But that makes me a better teacher because kids that are motivated and feeling good and confident are even better students, which makes my instruction work even better, which makes you even more successful and confident. Maybe that's what we can do for effective relationships. Now, after having said all that, I would say this. A teacher who really likes kids and is genuine with kids and has a positive relationship would make this thing work twice as well. But I don't know what to do when we walk in and that's not there from the get-go. What I'd like to spend our last hour on is the basics of the physical environment. So I gave you those three pieces: instruction, environment, relationship. I said I want to kind of consider relationship as being enveloped in the other two. We'll start with environment, and then tomorrow we'll do instruction and move on to a couple of other pieces with that. So what we're looking at is going back to that classroom filled with middle school kids, and I have bet all your money on that working in there. What are the things that the teacher could do in the environment to increase the probability of kids' success? Start with this. Schedules. There is compelling evidence out there, not just from schools, but on human beings in general. The more people can predict what's going to happen next, the better in terms of predicting successes. So what that means for us as teachers is, how do we make sure that we do the same thing in the same order, in the same way every time we do it? The more that can be on a daily basis, every day we start with this, then we move to this, and we do this, the more consistent that is, the lower the probability of behavior problems. Now that's a good idea. If you work with kids with challenging behaviors or autism, it's more than just a good idea. It's exceptionally necessary, because we find that those two groups of kids, especially, when they don't know what's going to happen next, anxiety levels go up and behavior problems come with them. That doesn't mean every single kid with BD or autism, but it's a really predictable thing. So we come back to thinking, how much of consistent, start that over. How consistent do you need to be for your classroom? Because I bet you there are classrooms out there where you could have no consistency and things would be okay. But that's not the norm. That's the outlier. So a lot of these things I'm going to think of this same way, and I'm sure you've heard this or thought this yourself. I think it's way easier to go into a classroom and be really consistent and then back it off as the year goes by than it is to go in willy-nilly and try to make it consistent somewhere along the line. Always easier to back off than it is to go on. So start your year off with a real consistent schedule and do things the same way to build the routine. Once kids are predicting what will happen next, you can start experimenting to see, if I did this a little different, will kids freak out? Worst day of the year for me always was assembly day, because the schedule was different and I spent the whole day going, no, it's just the schedule, we're going to do it now instead of, and it was just freaked everybody out for whatever reason. Second, have expectations for every moment of the day. That sounds harsh, but it's this simple. Hey, and when you're done with that, you can do one of these two things. I can remember teachers saying that to me when I was a kid. All they're doing is saying, even when you're done with what the expectation is, there are other expectations. I'm giving you some choices, but those are your choices. As somebody who's taught BD kids my entire teaching career, it sends a shiver down my spine to hear somebody say, and when you're done with that, find something to do. Because they will. What we have to be thinking is, are you teaching kids what the expectations are? And are you making it clear to them and keeping that consistent within your schedule? The other one that falls into that same thing is the sequencing and length of activities. How long could your kids do sustained silent reading before somebody disrupts the whole class? Well, I've heard people say, we do a sustained silent reading, it's the worst time of the day. My kids are horrible during that time. And I say, how long could your kids read without saying anything out loud before someone disrupted? 3 minutes. Okay, how long is sustained silent reading? 20 minutes. Well, that's a dumb idea. You've said, my kids can be successful for this long, so let's ask them to do this long. Don't. We have to. We have to do it. No, I get you've got 20 minutes set aside. Here's what you do. Take your kids for 2 minutes. Stop them. What are you reading? That sounds interesting. What are you reading? I'm going to be interested to know what happens next. You got to read. Go. 2 more minutes. Stop them. And over the year, start inching them up. But it makes no sense to say, no, we got to go 20, even though by the end of 20, everybody will be in a corner. That's the way we do things. It just makes no sense to say, we've got a routine that lasts longer than what we could predict kids could be successful with. So think out ahead of time. How long can something last? If they can't do the whole hour that you need to do something, then you might need to break up in the hour. They do this, then they go do this activity, and they come back to this, and they move them around, do things. But bottom line is, if you just say, no, it has to be this for all that time, even though they won't do it, you'll just have a lot of failures. And finally, anything that's going to be different needs to be taught ahead of time. There's 3 groups of kids for whom all of these things are more important. Kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, kids with a history of failure, and kids with disabilities need these things more than other kids. And again, why? A lot of theories, but we know those kids respond better. Or without these things, they respond worse. I'm going to, this is not what's supposed to be there. When I was teaching, I learned that you must have that schedule firm in the kids' minds. Now again, I taught adjudicated adolescent boys most of my teaching career in a segregated setting. But I found that if they thought that I was making up what we're going to do, that meant they could argue. So if I say, let's see, what should we do next? How about math? That was an entree to say, no, we're not doing math, that sucks. Let's go outside, let's do this, let's do something, and there's an argument. Here's what I learned early in my teaching career. Put it on the board. It's not my idea anymore. And we do it this way every day. Oh, look, it's 9:40. That means it's math now. Oh, math. I know. I don't want to either. But it's 9:40. It's the schedule. It's not me. It's the schedule. And then when they'd say, that sucks, I know. But look what we get to do afterward. Sticking with the schedule. And what I found is they argued the first couple of days. And as it got going, when I'd say 9:40 math, they'd be going, while they were pulling their math book out. I'm okay with that. If it is consistent and they can predict it, it'll work better. Take it off of you, put it on the schedule. Oh, it's not my idea, it's the schedule. And you can argue with the schedule, but it doesn't listen. So let's just do this where we can move on to the next good thing. And I won't say I never had a problem, but problems are really cut down. The other thing I learned is tell them exactly how much we have to do before we're done. Kind of like giving them the expectation. Because if I just said, hey, let's do another page, guess what 8 adjudicated adolescent boys say? Yeah, no, except in way more colorful terms than that. But if I said, we're going to do 2 pages, that's it. So when we're done with that 2 pages, we're done. When you get done with page 1, you go half done. It's the way you frame it, the way you say it, the way you put it out there for them, but they got to know ahead of time. You're not surprising them with stuff. They know what's coming. When I do talks on classroom arrangements, the teacher desk, student desk thing is probably the question I get most often. Where should the teacher's desk be, and how should it be set up, and what about the kids' desks? And there's no research on any of this. So I'll just give you what I think is logical common sense. First of all, with regard to teacher's desk. One, I think while you're teaching, it's unlikely you should be at your desk if you're doing the things that we know give you the best probability, moving around, engaging with kids, etc. But I get you got a desk and sometimes you need to sit there. So this is the only thing I would say. When I'm seated at my desk, I should be able to see the eyeballs of every kid in this room. Every kid. Eye contact is a big deal. But I've had people argue with me. No, I put my desk at the back so they never know if I'm looking at them. It's like, I want them to know I'm looking at them, because my kids, if I'd have been at the back, would have spent the whole lesson going, what's he doing? Where is he? Where's he? Where's he? I want them to just barely lift their head up and go, yep, he's looking. He's always looking. I don't need to keep looking to see if he's looking, because he's always looking. That's the way I want them to think, is that my head is up and I'm looking. And so if I'm at my desk, I want to still be able to make that eye contact. That's all we're looking for. Can you see the whites of their eyes? In terms of student desks, there is no research on this. Within the last month, I've had 2 different people tell me there was. First, I had a group of people tell me, because we're doing these little vignettes, some of the vignettes you'll see tomorrow, filming them in classrooms, and they said, oh, you can only have rows because the research says kids with problems can't be in any arrangement but rows. Like, what research? There's no research that says that. Then we went into a classroom that did have rows, and somebody told me, oh, the research shows that rows don't work at all. No, there is no research on any of this. So how should you arrange your room? In whatever way you think makes your kids most likely to be successful. Period. In my opinion, having a classroom with really small furniture that I could make into lots of different arrangements would be the best. Sometimes I'd like rows, sometimes I'd like groups, sometimes I'd like circles, sometimes. But there isn't any research that says any one is better than another. In terms of sight lines, we want to see the teacher positioning him or herself where they can look at kids. This is a real simple one. Wherever I go, and this would be my worst case scenario of a classroom because I can't walk through this classroom. Generally, even when I'm teaching at the university, but when I go out and teach in classrooms, which I do fairly often, I'm moving through the whole classroom while we're doing stuff. I hate these long table things that you can't get into the middle of. But if I were walking around a classroom and I decided that I needed to work with her for a minute, and I came over and we worked like this, something bad is happening back here. So what we try to tell people is, as you move about the room, as you go places, continue to turn and move your head and move your body and talk to kids and come back and don't. And I know that I'm super, super paranoid about this because of where I've worked, and you probably don't need to be as paranoid. But instead of paranoia, just think about it as more eye contact, higher levels of success. But if I do need to work with her, I'm going to work with her like this, because my eyes are still up and I can still, while we're talking, continue to look. And when the other kids look over and see, he can still see me, they go back to what they were doing, which is something I refer to as the 1 second rule. The 1 second rule is every kid in this room should believe that I could make eye contact with them in less than 1 second if I wished to do so. So right now it's been more than a second since I've looked over there, but if something happened, I could look over in less than a second. You never know when I might be looking at you because I'm at most a second away. Now what that does is it prevents some problems. The entire time I've been talking today, she's been thinking about reaching over and pulling her hair and then slapping her really hard. I mean, it's right there. Whack. She could have done that so easily. The only reason she hasn't is because I've not given her an opportunity. I've kept my head up and my eyes up. And if I would have heard the whack, I could have looked back before she could recoil. So she hasn't found a spot yet. That allows me to do this. What's your name? Kayla. Kayla? Yep. That allows me to do this. By the way, Kayla, you know, we've had a lot of discussion about hands to self. You're nailing it. I am really impressed by how hard you're working at this. I'm going to tell your mom you're doing a great job. Now, you could all argue, well, yeah, the only reason she didn't grab her hair and strangle her is because you didn't give her a chance. Thank you. I call that being an effective teacher. When I set kids up to be successful, it allows me to say, thank you. As we know, every single time that kid is successful raises the probability that they'll do it again. And after enough successes, she might just have a snowball rolling fast enough for me to step out and let her keep doing it without me. But until she can do it without me, that's my job. But don't get into that position of thinking, because I made her do it right, I shouldn't praise her for it. You've got to praise her for it. She did the right thing, even if you had to hold her hand to make her do it. It needs to be given a positive feedback statement. So be thinking about that 1 second issue as you move around to class. Things that I don't think we teach teachers to think about. Will pencil sharpening ever be a problem for you? Pencil sharpening can be a problem. How do we get a drink? Can anybody go? You have to go one at a time. If somebody's at the sink, how close can you get to them? I literally drew a circle around the sink that I thought was the out of splash zone range. And when someone's at the sink, you don't go within that circle, because my thinking was, as soon as you step in that circle, they can't resist splashing you. So you just stay outside the circle till they come back out. But those kind of little things people haven't thought out. My first ever teaching job, that facility, I had those 8 adjudicated adolescent boys, and I had a bathroom inside my room, which I thought is awesome because I don't have to try to decide who walks to the restroom and do I have to take them all and all that. What could go wrong, I thought. So after a while, I walked into that restroom and it was a complete, clearly, purposefully disastered room. Just a mess and disgusting, and I got really mad, and I went and yelled at all my kids, and you know, they were like 14 to 17 years old. I yelled, "You're not using the restroom, and we're closing this down because you guys can't be mature enough to handle the restroom." And they just called my bluff on it right away, like, "I'm not working, I gotta go to the bathroom." All right, I gotta get the bathroom back. So here's what I did. I put a piece of paper on the door of the bathroom, and it had, "You sign your name." And here's the simple rule I taught. Once you put your name on that door, you are personally responsible for the condition of that bathroom until another name appears on that door. So just beware, if you were to sign your name on there, use it, come out, and an earthquake happens, you're responsible for the destruction in that bathroom. So don't go in there unless you're willing to take on that responsibility. So now what kids would do is when they need to use the restroom, first of all, they would go, open the door and look in to make sure there were no problems, because they don't want to get stuck being responsible for problems. Then they'd write their name, they'd go in, they'd use it, and they'd come back out, and then they're looking at everybody to make sure who's going to go in there and mess with me. I just stopped worrying about it. I let them police themselves. Then they'd come out to me, "There's dust on the toilet." I was like, "I think we're okay with it," but they wanted to bust the next guy, you know, and they come back out. But I just decided I'm not going to make this you against me. It's you against you. If you're going to get busted by your own peers who are way tougher on you than I am. So find the thing that makes your routine work for you. Moving about the room, we've talked about already. I like to move around the room and have as much proximity with kids as possible. Now, like I said, teaching in a room like this where you can't really move around, it's really hard, but what I would like to do is be moving by, and if I don't say something to the kid, I might just give them a thing. Sometimes I just let them know I'm there as I walk by. Just let them know that I'm there and say something. Good, thank you guys. All right, good job. Okay, lots of people getting stuff done today. Awesome. So it's really hard to do that, walking up and down these things. But I like to think, how do I use my motion in the room to have an interaction with kids as much as possible while I'm teaching? But sometimes that's easier if I've decided where people sit. I am, because again, from where I've taught and what I do, I'm a big fan of assigned seats. So very often I go out into schools and I'll work with a teacher for a week or so. And what I generally do is I start, do a day or two, and then I say, let's assign seats. They come in and I go, look up at the board here. Find your desk with your name on it. That's where you're sitting. I've done this with every level, elementary and middle, high school. I say, we've just decided to mix it up so that you sit next to different people all the time. So find your name and sit there. That part about random assignment is a lie. We thought about this very carefully, where people should sit. And it's about, can I put you in a place where I can walk by you more often and say thank you and give you reminders, etc. That doesn't mean I put the problem kids all at the front, because I don't think putting all the problem kids at one place is a good idea anyway. But I want you to be I want to move in the middle of the class, so I'm going to put you in the middle of the class, so as I'm moving around, I move around you more. If you think about it, if I'm cutting a figure 8, the kid in the middle gets seen twice as much as anybody else. That's the way I want to think about this. So, what if I do this and then I realize this was a bad idea, this threesome here? I didn't realize it ahead of time, but once we set that table up, they are causing a lot of commotion. I try very hard not to move kids during class. You got to know your kids. The kids that I've dealt with, moving them during class would have taken way longer than doing something else. First, when I come over here and say, enough, you need to move. First, she's going to say, why do I have to move? She started it, and now I got to deal with this. Second, every kid that was on task is watching this, because nothing is more entertaining than this. Seriously. If you were an adult in the classroom, you couldn't take your eyes off it. It is interesting. So we got to do all this. It's going to take forever, and eventually one of them is going to be mad. What I found, if I can possibly avoid it, I will not move them. What I'll do is I'll use my proximity there. So instead of me cutting my little circle through here, I've done this where I've spent my whole period doing my little circle right here. So here's what we're going to do next. And then you guys can do that. You guys have got this, right? So then, and I just don't give them a chance to have that problem. I use my proximity to keep it from happening, because you guys have got your pencils. So then the next thing, and I'll just do that. Tomorrow when they come in, I go, last night I just decided to flip a bunch of coins and move people around randomly because I like you to sit next to different people. And the kids go, that's weird. The only thing different is she's sitting over there. And I go, yeah, I don't know. That's just the way it... But I never said, you did wrong, you've got to move. Because I don't think there's any benefit to doing that. If I can make that happen without having to have the argument, we're better off in the long run. When you think about reacting to kids that do have problems, think about your eyesight, your eye contact. So if I'm cutting through this room and things are going well and I'm talking to people saying, good job, you guys are doing great, well, I'm really impressed, you guys are getting this stuff done. Any questions here? Great, thank you so much. And I'm probably doing it slower than this, but awesome. And I go by these guys. And then as I come over this way, I hear these guys being really disruptive and goofing around. Do not yell across the room. Front table! Because as soon as I do that, every eyeball in this class is like, cool, what's the front table up to? I want you guys to stay on task. I've been saying, thank you so much for getting it done. So what you do is, you don't run over there either, because that'll get everybody's attention. If you move quickly, go, what's going on? And then everybody's going to go, what's he up to? Stop and make eye contact. I call this the mom look. Give that 4 seconds. At the end of 4 seconds, if they've noticed you, they'll go, and then you just do this. And this is what you say every time, regardless. Good choice, I'll be right there. And go here first. And then work your way back there quickly. If they don't get that going, walk slowly and deliberately over there while praising others. 3, 4. Okay. Awesome. Thank you guys. Great job. Really impressed. We're almost done, so keep moving. Back to the eye contact, but with proximity. 90% of the time, they go, oh yeah, and they get back to work. When they get back to work, you say this, excellent, keep going, I'll be right back. Because if you stand there after they're doing what you're supposed to do, it becomes a challenge. If one of them has a behavior disorder, this is what they're going to say. We get it, get out of here. I'm challenging them now. All I did before was, great idea, great choice, I'll be right back. I might go away, I think to myself, how long could I be gone before that goes south again? I'm saying with this group 7 seconds, okay? Then here's what I'm going to do. Great job, I'll be right back. I'm going right from here. Awesome job, I'm real impressed. Great job over here. You guys are still on it? Fantastic, keep going. How long do you believe you could stay away and still be able to come back and say, wow, you're still working, I'm impressed. You know, if it's 1 second, see if you guys can get some stuff done. Hey, how are you doing? You're still working? Fantastic. I mean, it's a stupid little game, but that's the idea. Find a way to make them successful so that you can reinforce it, which makes them more likely to keep doing it, which makes you less likely to have to keep coming back, and it's something you build. None of this is foolproof. As everybody I hope knows, this is probability. You get a better probability from that than by doing other things, but that doesn't mean this will work for sure or that something else won't. If the hover and eye contact doesn't work, then you move to a question. Always confront kids with a question rather than a statement. It's less confrontational. Here's a statement. You guys need to get on task. You guys aren't getting this done. You guys are making me think you can't sit. Those are all statements. Here's a question. Hey, what's everybody else doing right now that we're supposed to be doing? Do you know what it is? They have to answer that in some way. Exactly. Show me working on that. What would it look like if you were working on that? Good job. You guys are really getting it. I'll be right back. Keep going. Start with a question, get them to answer. If they don't know, then you got to reteach. Hey, we're supposed to do 2 things. Do you know what they were? You guys remember? Oh, you don't? I'll remind you. Number 1 was get your name on your paper and write that first sentence. Number 2 is get a second sentence. How many of you have got your name in the first sentence? None of you? That's a good place to start. Show me writing name in first sentence. Show me doing. Keep working on that. I'll be right back. Good job. You reteach it. But if they know what to do, you don't need to reteach. You just say, show me. But a lot of times what I find is I think they know, and when I go over and say, show me, they really don't know what to do. They can tell you, here's what you said, but I really don't know what that means. So I'm not over there yelling at them now, I'm over there teaching, reteaching to them because they need that extra bit. So it's a big part of what we've been talking about here is adult placement. Where you move, how you move, where you stand, and how we arrange other things. Here's a school-wide example of that same thing. So this is an elementary school in Gainesville, Florida. It was 2 years into PBIS. They came to me and said, it's not working anymore. Almost a third of our problems come from a 20-minute recess in the morning. And I said, okay, well, look at your data. Who, what, when? Well, we already know when. It's this morning recess, and we know where. It's the playground. So what are the predictors? And they said, it's everybody doing a whole bunch of stuff. So I said, let's go back to where we were 2 years ago. You guys predicted 20-minute AM recess would be a problem among everybody. You said it would be fighting, arguing, and rule violations. And you said the reason for that was the area was giant and there were a million things going on. So you guys told me that you were going to teach a rule for every activity, and at the start of the year you were going to have a round robin with the kids going to each thing where they spent 5 minutes of you discussing the rules. Now everybody knows every rule for everything. You said that the adults would be out there reminding the kids, and it was going to take 4 adults on duty to make that happen. Is all of that still going on 2 years later? And they said, yes, it is. So then you know what we need to do? You need to go get an observation because there's something we're missing. So they sent some of their team out to just stand on the outside and look and see if they could figure out where problems were happening and why. So what we know is we've got this playground that's big and it's got an L shape to it, and we know that there's a million things going on, and we know that there are 4 people working out there, and here they are. They came back to me right away and said, we still do the round robin, we still assign 4 people, but the people talking to kids and moving around part isn't happening. So this is what they did. They divided their playground. They didn't draw lines, they just told the adults agreed. There were 4 quadrants, and now every adult would be assigned to playground A, B, C, or D duty instead of playground duty. That's the only thing they did. And here's what happened to problems on the playground in 1 month. Adults interacting with kids is a big predictor for kid success. That's what we have to keep thinking about, is how do we get back to the way adults do this? So what I'd like to do is transition us to what we're going to do tomorrow. How do you provide effective instruction in a classroom like that can't even sit still and look at you? That's management, but management and instruction are largely the same thing. So I want to spend a lot of time tomorrow morning going through how that should be put together to make it work. I've got a lot of videos and I've got some activities I want to show you to try to make a case for there is a way to do this to maximize the probabilities. After we get done with the instruction part tomorrow, we're going to kind of move into a last piece, which is how do you get adults to change their behavior? Because that is way harder than changing kid behavior. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow.